ikar. Kenti yelanu chos Yeshuos. Esahu v'shem Adonai ekra. Ay 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 da 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 dum bum bum ba da ba dum bum 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 ba da ba dum ba dum bum ba da ba dum bum 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 ba da ba dum bum bum ba da ba dum bum 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 ba da ba da la 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 da 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 dum biddy dum bum ba da 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 dum ba da ba dum. Good evening, a good Vok Shavua Tov, a good week to you, my holy sisters and brothers. Wow, we're coming out of Shabbos. We're entering a spectacular week, a week of joy, the week of Purim. Let's light up the darkness. And what I was just singing during the countdown, that's what we sing every week at the end of Shabbos when we make Havdalah. This is just a wisdom candle, but earlier when I came home from shul tonight, from synagogue, Nina and I and our son did Havdalah inside, and we sang this same song. This is the introduction, and then we make the three blessings on wine, on the spice that we smell, and on a Havdalah candle. This would not be a Havdalah candle because it only has one wick. A Havdalah candle usually has 3 braided wicks. But you need at least 2 to make a Havdalah candle. And then we go on and make the blessings for opening the week, separating the holiness of Shabbos from the rest of the week. But in that introduction to Havdalah that we normally sing before the blessings of Havdalah, the part I sang, it ended with, for the Jews there was light and joy, gladness and honor, so let it be with us. And that, of course, is from the Megillah, from the book of Esther, from the Purim story. So little, we say that every week, but it's especially meaningful when we open the week that contains Purim. So Purim begins Monday night, runs all through Tuesday, and on Tuesday we'll do our annual Megillah reading in English online at noon Pacific, and we'll have the donate button on, but all the donations on that day will not go to our organization. They'll flow through us and will contribute to to various needy people and needy causes. It's a mitzvah for Jews to give gifts to the poor on Purim. That's one of the halachas, one of the commandments of Purim. Also, you give gifts to each other. You read the Megillah and a few other things. How's everybody doing? Great to be with you on a Saturday night. Who's with us? Joseph in Massachusetts, Bella in Florida, Maney in Ohio, Ryan saying good evening. Purim is around the corner. Amen. And over there on the YouTube side, Marjorie checking in from Georgia, and Mickey, I believe, in New Jersey. We are planning a wonderful Suda to break the fast of Esther. That's right, we fast on Monday. That's a daytime fast, right? So the fast will begin at sunrise Monday morning, and then we'll break the fast Monday night as we roll into Purim. Okay, let's do our daf. We didn't have class yesterday, Friday, because I was at a special training session for our organization, Magen Am. I got to say, it went well. I was pleased. I'm one of the older guys in the group. What can I say? And I didn't grow up around guns. Came to it late, but I felt that, for the protection of our community, it was important. So I've since become a licensed security guard. I wear a badge and have insignia on I wear a black blazer and a black hat in shul. In the evenings, I don't, because there's no alcohol and firearms. So since we make a l'chaim at lunch, then in the afternoon and evening, I don't carry or wear the blazer. But in the morning, on Saturday, I do. On Friday nights, I do. And most mornings of the week, I do. There's a lot of training, ongoing training that goes with it. Now our organization has sort of stepped up even its own standards, which are already really high, and we had to do these FBI level qualifications to make sure that we're competent in case, God willing, there's ever a need. Then it's too late to figure out what you're going to do. You have to have your instincts really well trained and be accurate, etc. And so that's part of the ongoing training. I wish it wasn't necessary. At any rate, we didn't have class on Friday for that reason. We did a double daf on Thursday, pages 38 and 39. We did most of page 39, so we're going to finish what we didn't do of page 39 today, and then we'll do today's daf, page 40. We are in chapter 6 of Tractate Nazir, the 17th volume of the Talmud. Chapter 6 here, we are now continuing our discussion of Mishna number 2. This Mishna is the sort of home address of an unspecified term of nazirus, is 30 days long. And it also says that if you shave, right, the Mishnah said that if a nazir shaved his hair during that period, or if he was shaved against his will, which is the way they say if he was shaved by bandits. So this negates 30 days of his nazirus, which he must count afresh. And with regard to a nazir who shaved his hair, whether he did so with scissors or with a razor, or if he pulled out any amount of hair, he is liable. So we're going to continue our discussion of that Mishnah. We picked this up near the top of 39b. The B side of 39 is pretty short. The Gemara asks, but what about this law that is taught in a baraisa? A baraisa is contemporaneous with the Mishnah, not quite as authoritative, but still quite authoritative, since it's the sages of the Mishnah, the Tanaim. So what about this halacha, this law that is taught in a baraisa with regard to a nazir who was shaved by bandits, and they left him with enough hair to bend its end to its root, which I think is basically like my hair, right? Like a crew cut. I don't have much on top, but on the sides here. So if like you could with the tweezers, you could bend the hair and you could take the end down to its root. It doesn't take a very long hair to do that. And I think elsewhere we saw that even in 7 days you could grow enough hair that with the tweezers you could bend the end of the hair down to its root. Okay, so if the bandits shaved this guy against his will, but they left him some hair, then what? Does this negate his nazirus or not? The Gemara says that they let them with enough hair to bend it to its root. This does not negate the days of his nazirus. And if it should enter your mind that hair grows from the bottom, that's where we left off on Thursday, this question which the sages resolved, that does hair grow from the end of the hair or from the root? Yes, it grows from the root, but this is further proof about that. And if it should enter your mind that hair grows from the bottom, well, let it negate the days of his nazirus in that case as well, as the remaining hair grew only after his acceptance of nazirus. So the Gemara answers, this is referring to a case where they shaved him after the completion of his nazirus, but before he sacrificed his offerings, right? So at the end of a term of nazirus, then the nazir will shave. He can't shave his head during the days that he is a nazir, nor drink any produce or eat produce of the grapevine, nor make himself impure for the dead, for example, by attending a funeral in a cemetery. And then he must bring the offerings that a nazir is obligated to bring at the end of nazirus, right? So what happens? So this case where a bandit shaved him, but it matters when they shaved him. And the Gemara says this is referring to a case where the bandits shaved him after the completion of his days of nazirus, but before he sacrificed the offerings. And whose opinion is expressed in this baraisa? It is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, who says, with regard to any nazir who became ritually impure after the completion of his term, this negates only 7 days, right? If he became impure, meaning for the dead, right? He helped handle a corpse, which is a fine thing to do, but a nazir is not allowed to do it. Other people, it's a huge mitzvah to attend to the dead, to make sure that a dead person is properly buried. But a nazir is not allowed to participate in that. I think with the exception of unattended corpse, that if he doesn't do it, nobody else will do it. Then I don't know if he violates the days of his nazirus or not. I'm sure we'll come to that. So the Gemara asks, what is the reason of Rabbi Eliezer? And the Gemara answers, he derives the law of the shaving of ritual purity at the end of his term of nazirus. Right? Once he can't shave his head while he's a nazir, but at the end of his nazirus, part of the process of ending his nazirus is then he does shave. And that's called the shaving of ritual purity. And that is as opposed to the shaving of ritual impurity. If while he is a Nazir, he becomes impure for the dead, as we've seen, then he has to shave his head and start his nazirus over again, right? If he comes impure for the dead, whatever number of days he counted toward the term that he vowed to be a Nazir, he has to reset the clock. Right, so Rabbi Eliezer derives the law of shaving of ritual purity at the end of the term of Nazirus from the shaving of impurity during Nazirus. And just as with the shaving of impurity, if he became impure on the day of the completion of his term, he must wait 7 days, at which point he is purified from the impurity imparted by a corpse. That's because it normally just takes 7 days to become tahor, to become pure again, after getting corpse tuma, right? If you handle a body, if you enter a cemetery, etc., then you're impure for 7 days. You have to go through that purification. At which point he is purified from the impurity imparted by a corpse, and he shaves his hair. So too, with the shaving of purity. If he was shaved before he brought his offerings, he negates only 7 days. And the sages, including Rabbi Eliezer, have an accepted tradition that every 7 days, hair grows enough to bend its end to its root. Consequently, if this amount of hair remained after he was shaved on the day of the completion of his Nazirus, he does not forfeit any days and he need not wait any longer. Now, the Mishna taught with regard to a Nazir who shaved his hair, whether he did so with scissors or with a razor, or he pulled out any amount, he is liable. And the sages taught, the Torah states with regard to a Nazir, a razor shall not come upon his head. And I have derived from this only a razor, right? That he can't cut his hair with a razor. Maybe it's okay for him to cut his hair with other means. It's just that he can't, take a razor to his head and shave his head clean. From where do I derive? Now I have derived only that with a razor. The Torah says specifically, a razor shall not come upon his head. So we know a razor can't. But from where do I derive, says the Tana, or says the rabbi here speaking, from where do I derive that he is liable if he tore out, uprooted, or pulled out any amount of his hair? And the verse states, the next verse, the same verse, he shall be holy. He shall let the locks of the hair of his head grow long. Now, this is the statement of Rabbi Yoshai. So Rabbi Yonasan says a different interpretation. From the word razor, I have derived only that a razor. He's prohibited to shave his head with a razor. Whereas if he tore out, uprooted, or pulled out any amount of his hair, he is exempt. And the Gemara asks, but isn't it written, he shall be holy? And the Gemara answers, that is to say that if he shaved his hair with a razor, he stands liable for violating both a positive mitzvah and a prohibition. By shaving with a razor, he also transgresses the positive mitzvah of he shall be holy, he shall let the locks of his head grow long. In other words, if a Nazir, while he is a Nazir, cuts his hair with any implement, okay, so then he becomes liable. He has made a transgression. If he shaves his head with a razor, he's violated two verses, right? Both a positive and a negative commandment. Now, it is taught in another baraisa, same idea, but a little different, that from the word razor, I have derived only a razor. He cannot shave his head with a razor. From where do I derive that he is also liable if he tore out, uprooted, or pulled out any amount of his hair? The verse states, a razor shall not come upon his head, indicating that he may not remove his hair in any manner. And the baraisa asks, and since we eventually include everything that removes hair, what is the meaning when the verse states, a razor shall not come upon his head? It could have just said, he shall not remove any of his hair. Why does it say, a razor shall not come upon his head? Why does the verse mention a razor when you're telling us that other implements are equally forbidden? And the baraisa answers, it is because we have not learned that the last shaving, i.e. the Nazir's shaving of ritual purity at the end of his term of Nazirus, must be performed specifically with a razor. As the verse merely states, he shall shave his head. Right? With regard to while he's Nazir, it says a razor shall not come upon his head. When he completes his Nazirus, it says he shall shave his head. It doesn't say he shall shave his head with a razor. So it is impossible to learn this requirement from the law that a leper, a metzora, right? As we've talked about many times, forget the word leper. That's an English translation, but we're not talking about somebody with leprosy. We're talking about somebody with tsaras, right? The biblical condition that no longer exists, which is a physical manifestation of a spiritual malady that used to exist, usually associated with lashon hara, that one who gossiped enough would eventually develop blotches on his skin that would have to be examined by a priest who would determine, yes, that's tsaras. Then that person would have to go through a purification process, which included shaving not only the hair of his head, but all the hair off his body. So there's the shaving of the metzora. Now we're on page 40a. And it is impossible to derive this requirement that he must shave his head, that the Nazir shaves his head with a razor at the end of his nazirus, from the case of a metzora. Why? Because as one does not derive, the metzora has to shave all the hair of his body with a razor. So can we derive that, since these are both cases of shaving, and since the metzora does shave with a razor, that therefore when we talk about a Nazir shaving his head, that also must be done with a razor? And the Gemara is saying, no, we can't make that derivation. And the reason is one does not derive a halacha, a law, in a lenient case from the law in a more stringent one, in a manner that would cause one to be more stringent in the more lenient case. Since the case of a metzora is more stringent than that of a Nazir, in what way is it more stringent? Because a metzora must shave his entire body. Therefore, we cannot derive from the laws of the metzora that the stringent law that he must use a razor, that the metzora must use a razor, we can't derive that the Nazir must also use a razor to shave his head. It is therefore necessary for the verse to specify that a Nazir's final shaving must be performed with a razor. So Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi says that the term razor itself is not necessary to teach that a Nazir's final shaving must be performed with a razor. How do we know? Because the verse states, number 6:5, the same verse we've been talking about, a razor shall not come upon his head until the completion of the days of his vowed nazirus to God. The full verse shows us that the Torah said after the completion of his term, the shaving must be performed with a razor. Now the Gemara comments, Rebbe claims that the term razor indicates that shaving, in this case that of a Nazir, after the completion of his term, may be performed only with a razor. If so, the verse should be understood in the same manner with regard to the prohibition of shaving. But if one examines the first part of the verse by itself, isn't it written, a razor shall not come upon his head? And the first Tana, whose opinion Rebbe does not dispute, derives from this verse that he is prohibited from shaving by other means as well, notwithstanding the explicit mention of a razor. So if we're learning out from a razor shall not come upon his head, that it is also prohibited for him to remove any hair from his head while he's a Nazir, whether with a razor or not, can we derive from the same verse that at the conclusion of his nazirus, when he must shave his head, that also must be done with a razor? And the Gemara explains that the phrase shall not come upon his head teaches that a Nazir may not remove his hair in any manner. As for the mention of razor in this context, it serves to teach that he will violate two prohibitions for his action of using a razor if he removes his hair while he's a Nazir. If he uses a razor, he's liable for using a razor to remove his head and for removing his head, which violates you shall be holy while you are a Nazir. If he removes hair while he's a Nazir not using a razor, let's say using scissors, he wouldn't have violated a razor shall not come upon his head, but he would have violated the positive commandment to you shall be holy. In other words, you shall keep that hair on your head. Now, concerning a Nazir who shaves his hair, Rav Chisda says, with regard to flogging, right? So he becomes liable to flogging, to lashes, of course, only if he was warned and he ignored the warning and there were witnesses, etc. But the fact is he would be liable for lashes if he shaved his head while he is a Nazir. So with regard to flogging, a Nazir who shaved his hair is flogged for shaving even one hair. With regard to invalidation, i.e. the ritual shaving of his hair at the end of his nazirus, the shaving is invalidated if he failed to remove two hairs. And as for negating his nazirus, shaving during his term negates, meaning he has to count the days over again, only if he shaved most of his head. And this applies only if he removed his hair with a razor. So let's just review that for a second. So while he's a Nazir, if he removes, he's not allowed to remove any of his hair. If he removes even one hair, he's liable to lashes for having removed hair while he is a Nazir. When he completes his Nazirus, and he has to shave his whole head with a razor, if he neglects to shave the entire head and he leaves 2 hairs, then he didn't complete his Nazirus, right? He has not fulfilled his obligation to shave his entire head. And in terms of, now, if while he's a Nazir, he shaves his head before he's supposed to do it, right? Before the completion of his Nazirus. So if he shaves even 1 hair, he's liable to flogging if he does it with a razor. But does he have to start the count of days over again? Not if he only shaves 1 hair, but only if he removes most of the hair, right? So more than half of the hair on his head. And this only applies if he's using a razor. Now the Gemara asks, this indicates that according to the opinion of Rav Chisda, a Nazir who shaved with a razor, yes, he negates 30 days. Whereas if he did so with anything else, no, he does not negate days. But isn't it taught, from where is it derived, to include all implements that remove hair, i.e., that a Nazir is liable if he uses any of them? And the verse states, shall not come upon his head, meaning in any manner. And this indicates that a Nazir must add days to his term of Nazirus, even if he shaved with an implement other than a razor. So rather, say that Rav Chisda meant in the manner of a razor, right? Because Rav Chisda said this only applies if he shaved his head with a razor. And what the Gemara is now saying is, well, it means even in the manner of a razor. Meaning that if while he's a Nazir, he removes any hair from his head in any manner, he's going to be liable for lashes. But in terms of whether he has to reset the count of days of his Nazirs, it's only if he removes more than half of his hair. Now, this opinion is also taught in a Baraisa, in the Tosefta 4.3, with regard to a Nazir who tore out, uprooted, or pulled out any amount of hair. This negates days of his Nazirus only if he shaved most of his head, and only if he did so in the manner of a razor. Now, Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Shimon, just as leaving 2 hairs at the end of his Nazirus when he has to shave his whole head invalidates his shaving of ritual purity at the end of his term, and the act is considered incomplete, so too leaving a mere 2 hairs negates days of his Nazirus if he shaved during his term. Now, we learned in a Mishna there at Negayim 14.4, 3 types of people must shave their hair, right? The Torah commands 3 people to shave their hair. And their shaving is a commandment, right? It's optional whether we want to shave. Now, a Jew is not allowed to shave with a straight razor to shave his beard, but 3 people are permitted to shave, right, with a straight razor. Let a razor come off of your head and remove your hair. And who are these 3? The Nazir, right, who shaves his head with a razor at the completion of his term of Nazirus. The metzora, who had tzaras and goes through purification. He has to shave his entire body. And who is the 3rd case where shaving is mandatory? It's almost like a trick question. It is not an ongoing mitzvah. This applies to the Levium, right? So I'm a Levite. Am I commanded to shave my head with a razor? No, it only applies to the Levites once in history. And that was in the desert when the children of Israel came out of Egypt. And God gave the Torah to Moses, who transmitted to the Jewish people. And as we've been reading the Torah portions each week, and this past week we read about the clothing of the Kohen Gadol, etc. And then, they sort of invested the priests and the whole tribe of Levi to attend to the priests and to take care of the tabernacle and eventually to serve in the temple and attend to the needs of the priests in the temple in Jerusalem. But when the Levites were initially sort of consecrated to that service of God, and this was right as opposed to all the other children of Israel who would receive portions of land in the promised land, the Levites didn't. Right, the portion of the Levites would be to attend to the needs of holiness, to matters of holiness. And when they were consecrated to that service at that time, once only, all the Levium were shaved. Right, so it happened once in history. Right, so here we write 3 types of people must shave their hair, and their shaving is a mitzvah: a nazir, a metzora, and a levium. When they were first sanctified for this service, as it is stated, and this you shall do to them to cleanse them, sprinkle the water purification upon them, and let them cause a razor to pass over all their flesh. So when the Levium were initially consecrated to this service, they were all shaved over all their flesh. And with regard to all of them, if they shaved with an implement other than a razor, or if they left 2 hairs uncut, they have done nothing, right? So for that service, they needed to do it with a razor. So the Gemara analyzes this Mishnah. The master said there, 3 types of people must shave and cut their hair, and their shaving is a mitzvah, a commandment. And the Gemara asks, this is obvious. After all, doesn't the Torah command these 3 to shave? And the Gemara answers, the statement of the Mishnah is necessary lest you say that the commandment is due to and aimed at the removal of hair, and therefore even one who applied a depilatory, right? Like, remember Nair? I don't know if that still exists, but it's like a foam or a cream that I'm sure they're depilatory still in existence today, right? Creams that people put on their skin, and then all the hair just falls off. So if the point was to remove all the hair off the body or off the head of these 3 categories, the Nazir, the metzora, and the levium, why do we have to use a razor? Isn't it good enough to use this depilatory cream? And the Mishnah therefore teaches us that this is not so. The mitzvah must be performed by shaving with a razor. And the Mishnah further teaches, and with regard to all of them, if they shaved with an implement other than a razor, they have done nothing. The Gemara asks, well, granted, with regard to a Nazir, the source of this law is clear. As it is written, a razor shall not come upon his head until the conclusion of his days of Nazirus, when a razor does come upon his head. And similarly, with regard to the Levium, it is written, and let them cause a razor to pass over all their flesh. That's at Numbers 8:7. However, from where do we derive that a metzora must be shaved with a razor for his ritual purification? The Torah doesn't specify that when the metzora goes through purification, that it's a razor specifically that has to be used to remove his hair. And if you would say that this law is derived from the case of the Levium, as just as Levium requires shaving and their shaving is only with a razor, so too I will bring the case of a metzora who requires shaving and say that his shaving can likewise be performed only with a razor. Well, then this comparison can be refuted. What is unique about Levium is that they have an extra stringency in that when the Levium were consecrated, not only was all the hair removed from their bodies, but also Aaron, right, Moses' brother, was instructed to wave the Levium. It's kind of interesting, right? Like normally, like when you make some kind of an offering of a small animal, like you wave it, right? It's one of the requirements for certain offerings. How do you wave a person? Well, presumably they did something like whatever, like they put their hands on them and they all wave together. However they did it, maybe Aaron was granted superhuman strength and he picked them up. I don't know, but there was a waving process that was part of that purification and consecration of the Levium in the desert. And that's not part of the process for a metzora. So how can you derive that just as a Levite was shaved with a razor, so too a metzora must be shaved with a razor, if the Levium had to be waved and shaved and the metzora does not get waved and shaved? So we don't know if the metzora has to be shaved with a razor. So we still don't have a source for why the metzora, when he is purified, must be shaved with a razor. So rather, the law that a metzora must use a razor is derived from the case of the Nazir, who does not require waving either. However, we can also refute this comparison, because what is unique about the Nazir is that when he brings his offerings at the conclusion of his Nazirus, those offerings include bread. Will you say the same with regard to a metzora, who also brings offerings to the temple as part of his purification, but his offerings don't include bread. So it's a different process. So since it's already a different process, why should we assume that when the metzora is shaved, it too must be shaved, he must be shaved with a razor? How are we going to derive this law? It's like the sages know he has to be shaved with a razor, but they're looking for the proof that it must be done with a razor. So rather, the law of the metzora is not derived from either of the above cases, neither the Nazir nor the Levite. Therefore, let it be derived from the two of them. So they work together. Since there's two cases where there's a commandment to shave, and the commandment includes that the shaving must be done with a razor, since we have a third case where somebody is commanded to shave, the razor is not specified, but let us derive that the combination, the pair of laws that the Nazirim and the Leviim must be shaved with a razor indicates that the metzora too, who must be shaved, therefore must be shaved with a razor. So the Gemara elaborates, as stated previously, from which single case can it be derived? It can't be derived from the single case of the Levite nor the single case of the Nazir. Because one, has to bring an offering, has bread in his offerings, is the Nazir, and the Levium required waving. So in this manner, the derivation has reverted to its starting point. However, at this stage, the law derived from a combination of the two sources. So the aspect of this case is not like the aspect of that case, and the aspect of that is not like the aspect of this. Each case has its own special features. But what's the common denominator of the shaving of the Nazir and the shaving of the Levite? The common denominator is that they require shaving, and their shaving is with a razor. Therefore, I will also bring the case of the metzora who requires shaving and say that his shaving must be with a razor. Now, Rava of Barnish said to Rav Ashi, and let us refute this derivation. Just because there's two cases where shaving is required and the Torah specifies that shaving is required with a razor, we can't necessarily extend to the third case where shaving is required, is mandatory, that it too must be done with the razor. Rava Barnish is challenging that. What is the common denominator of the Nazir and the metzora? The common denominator is that, the Nazir and the Levite, the common denominator is that the offering in each case does not include a level of poverty. Right, so a level of poverty means that there are certain offerings that are variable, and if a person is wealthy, he can bring a more expensive animal to the temple when it's standing in Jerusalem as an offering, and if he has less money, there's a cheaper choice, right, a less expensive choice. Often when a sheep is required, if there's a variable offering and it's possible to bring a less expensive offering, we go to birds. And if his means don't suffice to afford birds, then he can bring a meal offering, right, from grain. So the common denominator of the offering of the Nazir and the metzora is that the offering in each case does not include a poverty option. In both cases, the offering is fixed. A poor person does not have the option of bringing a less expensive offering due to his financial straits. Will you say the same with regard to a leper whose offering includes a level of poverty, as a poor person can bring turtle doves instead of sheep? So I guess they're saying the common denominator of the Levium and the Nazir. So the Levium and the Nazir did not have a poverty option, right? And right, of course, I was thinking, did the Levium bring offerings? Yes. When the Levium were initially consecrated, they brought offerings, right? There was bulls sacrificed on their behalf, as well as other stuff. But there was no option, a poverty option, right? And definitely that's the case with the Nazir. But the metzora. The metzora includes the poverty option, the Nazir does not. Okay, so the metzora has this poverty option. Since the Torah was more lenient in the case of a metzora, right, because a metzora didn't choose to become a metzora. I mean, he's being punished for some behavior, but he didn't choose to become a metzora. The Nazir chooses. The Levium did not choose to be Levium, as it were, or to be consecrated for their service, but they were given all kinds of other rewards. So we don't have to feel so bad that they didn't have the poverty option, and that the Nazir didn't have the poverty option because no one told him to become a Nazir. He did that of his own volition. The metzora, the Torah, is lenient with him. God is merciful. And says that he has the poor option if he can't afford to bring the more expensive offerings that a metzora brings. Right, since the Torah was more lenient in the case of the metzora than the cases of a Nazir and the Levium, it could also be that the law is also lenient with regard to his shaving by not demanding the use of a razor. Consequently, we have not yet proved, according to Rava of Barnish, that the shaving of a metzora must be with a razor. Now, in continuation of this discussion, Rava bar Misharshia said to Rava, This Tana, this rabbi of the Mishnah, initially said, with regard to the obligation of a Nazir to shave with a razor that we encountered on page 39b, it is impossible to learn this requirement from the law that a metzora must use a razor, as one does not derive a law in a lenient case from the law in a more stringent case that would cause one to be more stringent in the lenient case, as we already said. Now, this indicates that it is obvious to the Tana that a metzora himself must shave with a razor. And he then said, let us derive by means of an inference that a metzora must use a razor. And ultimately, he did not derive it from an inference by analogy either, due to Rabbi Barnish's objection. What then is the source of the law that a metzora must use a razor? They're just restating what I just said. We don't have a proof yet. So Rava, it's like they know it's true. They know that a metzora must shave with a razor, but they don't know why yet. So Rava said to Rava bar Misharshia, that Baraisa, which states that one cannot derive the law from the case of a metzora, which indicates that it is evident that a metzora must shave with a razor, is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis, meaning the majority. They derive the law that a metzora's the law of a metzora's shaving from the prohibition against destroying one's beard. Okay, so we're going to a different law. Conversely, this source, which attempted to derive the shaving of a leper from a metzora from that of a Nazir and the Levium, is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, who does not derive the law of a metzora shaving from the prohibition against destroying one's beard. So Rabbi Eliezer must therefore derive his law by analogy from the cases of the Nazir and the Levium. And this is as we learned in a Mishna in Makos 20a, and one is liable for destroying his beard only if he removes it with a razor, right? You notice like it's a commandment to grow your beard, but you see that there are Orthodox Jews who don't have beards, right? I don't have a beard. I often, trim down my beard. Now, I don't run a razor like with shaving cream and, straight blade over my skin. When an Orthodox Jew shaves his beard, he'll use an electric razor, which is similar to scissors, right? So we're not allowed to destroy our beards with a razor. Now, you might call an electric razor a razor, but it's not. Its action is much more similar to scissors. Right, so where am I? Right, since the verse states, so he shall, what is the reason of the rabbis? How do they derive this law that a metzora must shave with a razor? As it is, I skipped something. This is as we learned in a Mishnah in Makos 28. And one is liable for destroying his beard only if he removes it with a razor, right? A straight blade across the skin. So Rabbi Eliezer says, even if he removed it with small tweezers or a plane, like a wood plane used for shaving down wood, he is liable. So Rabbi Eliezer maintains that one violates the prohibition even by destroying his beard with means other than a razor. Right? So if the law was according to Rabbi Eliezer, then all Jewish men would have to, observant religious men, would have to have full beards. But it's not true. The law is not according to Eliezer. So the Gemara asks, what is the reason of the rabbis, the ones who hold that the destroying of a beard is only prohibited by a razor? How do they go from that to the law that a metzora, when he goes through his purification, must shave with a razor, who shaves his whole body with a razor? As it is taught in a Baraisa, the verse states with regard to the shaving of the metzora, Leviticus 14:9, he shall shave all his hair off his head and his beard. Now, since the verse states all his hair, what is the meaning when the verse adds his beard? Right? If the metzora has to shave all his hair off his body, well, that would include the beard. So why does the Torah go and add that specification, all his hair and his beard? The phrase "and his beard" comes to teach you something. And what is it? What is the meaning of the verse, his beard? It is because it is stated with regard to priests, neither shall they shave off the corners of their beards. Now, one might have thought that the same should also apply to a metzora, i.e. that a metzora who is a priest should be prohibited from shaving his beard. And for this reason, the verse states his beard, which emphasizes that despite the general prohibition barring a priest from shaving his beard, a priest who is a metzora is obligated to do so. And from where do we derive that this shaving of a metzora must be performed with a razor? That's the question we've been asking now 5 times. It is as it is taught in a baraisa. With regard to the prohibition against a priest shaving his beard, in the verse, neither shall they shave off the corners of their beards, Leviticus 21:5. Now, one might have thought that a priest should be liable even if he shaved his beard with scissors. And the verse states, in the general prohibition issued to all Jewish men, neither shall you destroy the corners of your beard, right? Similar to the commandment of the priest. Now, this teaches that one is liable only if he shaves in a destructive manner by uprooting the hairs entirely, which excludes the use of scissors, right? And that's why we can use an electric razor it's like cutting the hair, right? It doesn't shave the hair down all the way to the skin. It just cuts it short. An electric razor is like a very fast pair of scissors that cuts all the different hairs, but it doesn't shave you the way that a razor, a straight blade with shaving cream, etc., would do. Now, one might have thought that even if you removed it with tweezers or planes, like a wood plane, he should be liable. And the verse states, neither shall they shave off the corners of their beards, which indicates that the priests are liable only for removing their beards in the manner of shaving. How so? What is the manner of shaving that involves destruction? You must say this is shaving with a razor. And the rabbis learn from here that the implement forbidden to a priest is the same one that must be used for shaving a metzora, namely a razor. And that's kind of roundabout proof that they found to show that when a metzora shaves, he must use a razor, even though the Torah only said shaves and doesn't include that he must use a razor. And the Gemara asks, from where do we know that this is correct? Perhaps if a metzora actually removed his hair with tweezers or a wood plane, he also performs the commandment and thereby fulfills his obligation. And the verse is coming to teach us that even if the metzora is shaved with a razor, he is not liable for destroying his beard. Right? You might have thought that, well, you're not allowed to destroy your beard, but the metzora has to shave all his body, that therefore this comes to teach us that he's not liable for destroying his beard, even if he didn't use a razor. In other words, one might have thought that the metzora is prohibited from shaving with a razor, and the verse teaches that this is not correct. If so, there is no proof from here that the shaving of a metzora must be performed with a razor. And the rabbis say in response, if it should enter your mind that if a metzora performs his shaving not with a razor, but rather with tweezers or a wood plane, that it is well that he has performed the commandment, lest you think that, well, then let the verse be silent and refrain from the extra phrase, his beard, right? Remove all his hair and his beard. And I would say the following, and just as with regard to a Nazir who performs a transgression by shaving his hair during his nazirus, and who even so is deemed liable for removing his hair without the use of a razor, here too in the case of a metzora, where his shaving is a commandment, does it not follow all the more so that he should permit it to shave with any implement? And furthermore, if it should enter your mind that when he performs his shaving with tweezers or a wood plane, he performs a commandment, from the fact that the word razor is not written, he should not be allowed to use a razor at all, in accordance with the opinion of Reish Lakish, who says a principle in this regard. And the Gemara cites this principle, that any place where you find a positive mitzvah and a prohibition that clash with one another, you shall shave, you shall not shave, you shall shave, you shall not destroy your beard, there seems to be a conflict. If you can find some way to fulfill both, that is preferable. And if that is not possible, the positive mitzvah will come and override the prohibition. Now, in this case, the metzora can fulfill his duty with tweezers or a plane, and therefore it should be prohibited for him to shave with a razor. Since it was necessary for the verse to say that the positive mitzvah for a metzora to shave overrides the prohibition against destroying one's beard, this proves that the commandment can be performed only with a razor. And that is the proof that, like the Nazir and the Levium at the original consecration, when the metzora shaves for his purification, the shaving must be with a razor. Okay, let's go to comments and questions. Here on Nazir 40. Maybe there's no comments. Here we go. Sharon. Very good. What happens when a Nazir gets tzaras? Right? So very good. So a Nazir shaves at the conclusion of his nazirus and not before. If he shaves before the conclusion of his nazirus, he has to restart his nazirus. Now, what if he gets tzaras while he's a Nazir? And what if it's not a short term of nazirus, right? What if it's a long term of nazirus? So does he have to purify himself of his tzaras? I would say I'm not sure, but I would say probably yes. Because when you are a metzora, that's like heavy, overwhelming. It separates you from the community. A Nazir can be a Nazir. Okay, he can't shave his head. His hair's going to go long. He can't go to a funeral. He can't drink wine or eat grapes. But otherwise, he's freely mixing with society. When a metzora is a metzora, right, he has to separate himself from the community. When he walks around near people, he has to say impure, right, to let them know that he is a source of impurity. And if they come into contact with him, they will become impure. It's like a very difficult situation to be in. So presumably, he will shave he will go through a purification for tzaras, and he will shave. And then it'll be like he became impure for the dead, and he'll have to, but it wasn't for the dead, so he won't have to restart his whole count, but probably, he's going to have to redo some of the days of his nazirus. I don't remember if we're going to encounter that particular question. It's a great question, and what to do when you have both situations. Maybe it'll come up soon. I'm not sure, but that would be my impression. Yosef, what if somebody else destroyed your beard? Right. Well, that's you're talking about like bandits, but not in the case of a Nazir. You're talking about if somebody else did that to you. You're talking about like just a Jewish man, normal situation who's not allowed to shave with a razor, and somebody comes along and shaves him with a razor. Well, he's not allowed to do that willingly. He can't go to the barber and let the barber do that for him. That's still prohibited. But if it's done against his will, it happened. His hair will grow back. He's not punished for something that was against his will. Sharon, the Levium did wave before the sports. The Levium did the wave before the sports fan world caught on. Very good. That's right. The Levium did the wave. I mean, imagine what it was like. The whole tribe of Levi in the desert, consecrated to God's service. This actually just came up recently. Somebody was asking, we still do this, that if a Jewish couple, if their first child is a boy, right, then there's redemption of the firstborn. It's a little process where you give a few coins to a Kohen. You don't do that if a girl comes out first. It's only if it's a bechor, if it's a male firstborn. And you don't do that if he's actually born by cesarean section, because it's about opening the womb, and so that's considered a different process. And you don't do that if the father of the boy that's born, and therefore the boy also, is a Levite, right? And why is that? Because the Levites were sort of consecrated to take the place of the firstborn, right? The tribe of Reuben would have been sort of the firstborn tribe, and they were originally slated to do this service. But they were deemed not as worthy for that service as the Levium. Perhaps the reason for that is that the Levium, while they were slaves in Egypt, sort of kept up, their Torah study and other observances, while the other tribes didn't as much. But for whatever reason, you don't do redemption of the firstborn with Levium. So that's another difference. But part of the reason for that is that originally, when the children of Israel were in the desert, right, all the Levium, and for all time, were consecrated to this service. And so, if the temple, when the Mashiach comes, the temple goes up, the Levites will have duties to perform. In the meantime, we'll take the second Aliyah on Saturday morning when there's Torah reading, and when the Kohanim, right, when the descendants of Aaron bless the congregation. In Israel, they do that every day. Outside of Israel, we just do that on certain holidays. But when the Kohanim go to the front of the room and perform the priestly blessing over the congregation, before they do that, they need to wash their hands. And they don't actually wash their hands. They have their hands washed for them by the Levium, right? So my son and I will wash the hands of the Kohanim in our congregation when that priestly blessing is happening on holidays, which is called duchening. Anyway, that's a little aside about the Levium. That's what we've got for tonight. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow for page 41 at the regular Sunday time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a great night. Have a great week. And we're so excited that Purim is coming, beginning Monday night.